I woke up early that morning, before the sun even had a chance to stretch its first light across the sky. It was like the world was still holding its breath, and I just took it in. Quiet, peaceful, almost perfect. Lydia was lying next to me, her dark chestnut hair splayed out across the pillow. She looked like she was still lost in a dream, soft and serene. I remember thinking, this is how it should be. This is how I want it to stay. Today was special, our 21st wedding anniversary. I wanted it to be a day she would never forget, not just for the love we'd shared, but because she deserved it. We'd been through a lot together, ups and downs, highs and lows. But we made it. 21 years. So I took the day off work, planned it all out, a quiet day at home, just the two of us, no distractions. I wanted to cook her favorite meal, share a bottle of wine, and remind her why we fell in love in the first place. I slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake her. The house was still dark, except for the soft glow from the kitchen light as I started prepping. The smell of rosemary, garlic, and lamb filled the air as I worked, my mind buzzing with little details I had thought of over the last few days. Soft music playing, candles set, the whole house smelling like home. It was going to be perfect. When Lydia finally woke up, she stretched and smiled at me, the kind of smile that made my heart skip a beat. "Smells amazing," she said, her voice still thick with sleep. I smiled back, happy to see her happy. "Happy anniversary, babe." "Happy anniversary," she replied, her eyes sparkling with that familiar warmth. But there was something off about it. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I thought I was just being paranoid, so I pushed the feeling aside. As the day wore on, everything seemed to fall into place. The dinner was going perfectly. The house felt like a dream. I had it all. My beautiful wife, a home we'd built together, a life we'd worked so hard for. But I didn't know that everything was about to come crashing down. By the time dinner rolled around, the table was set, the wine was poured, and I was starting to feel like maybe this day would be as perfect as I imagined. Lydia came downstairs in a stunning sapphire dress that hugged her in all the right places. She looked incredible, and I couldn't help but feel proud. She sat down, and we started chatting, laughing about old times, reminiscing about how we met. But then, just as I was getting comfortable, I saw it. A flicker in her eyes. Something darting between her glances at the clock. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Oh yeah, just... I invited someone over," she said, her smile too wide, too fake. My stomach tightened, and I didn't even need to ask. "Who?" "A friend," she said, a little too quickly. "Julian. I thought it might... help us. You know, bring some... spark back." I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. Julian? Who the hell was Julian? And why would she think it was a good idea to invite another man into our home, on our anniversary? But I didn't say anything. Not yet. I just smiled, trying to hold on to whatever semblance of normalcy I could. I needed to see this through. It couldn't be happening. Not today. Not like this. And then he walked in. Julian. The guy was tall, built like a wall, muscles rippling under his tight shirt, and an arrogance that oozed from every step. He had that cocky smirk, like he owned the world. I couldn't help but feel a surge of anger, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't going to let him, see me crumble. He shook my hand, giving me that I'm the man vibe, and I knew this was no accident. This wasn't some casual friend she'd invited over. No, this was someone who was already too comfortable in my space, in my life. "So, Julian," I said, trying to keep things light, my voice colder than I meant it to be. "Glad you could join us." He gave me that smug smile. "Glad to be here, man. Lydia's told me a lot about you." I had 100 questions swirling around in my head, but I kept them to myself. For now. Something inside me knew that this wasn't just some simple mistake. This wasn't about reigniting a relationship. This was something else entirely. Something that would change everything. And then, as I watched them settle in, Lydia flashing him a flirtatious smile as she poured his wine, I knew it for sure. My wife was cheating on me. The night dragged on in a blur of awkward conversation and strained politeness. Lydia and Julian were practically feeding off each other's energy. Every smile, every laugh they shared felt like a slap in my face. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. But I stayed calm. I had to. I couldn't show them how much they were destroying me, not yet. Not in front of him. I kept telling myself it was just a joke. A stupid mistake. That maybe Lydia was just trying to be playful, trying to spice things up. But deep down, I knew better. My gut had been screaming at me for months. Little things here and there, missed calls, late nights at work, the constant glances at her phone. I'd ignored it all, hoping I was just paranoid. But now, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Julian, of course, didn't make it easy. He was all charm, flashing that perfect smile, tossing out compliments like candy. "This place is amazing," he said, gesturing around the room. "You've got it all, man." And there it was, the subtle little dig. I felt it in my chest, like a stone sinking in the pit of my stomach. He was already acting like he belonged here. Like he belonged with her. I excused myself, telling them I needed to grab some snacks from the kitchen. I needed a moment to clear my head, to get my bearings. Once I was alone, I stood there in the kitchen for a second, staring at the counter. I could hear them in the other room, laughing too loudly, their voices mingling in a way that made my skin crawl. I grabbed the edge of the countertop, my fingers digging into the cold surface as I tried to steady my breath. The anger started building in me. Not the kind of blind rage that would make me snap. It was something sharper, more focused. I could feel the clarity coming over me like a wave. This wasn't about saving my marriage anymore. This was about making them both feel the weight of their choices. I reached for my phone. My hands were steady, no shaking, no hesitation. I fired off a message to my lawyer, to my private investigator, to my financial advisor. It was simple. "It's happening tonight. Pull the trigger." I didn't need to explain any further. I had everything lined up. The plan was set. The moment Lydia brought Julian into our home, it was no longer about salvaging anything. It was about making sure they both paid for the lies. I took a deep breath, trying to push down the knot in my stomach as I grabbed a bottle of whiskey. I needed to keep my head, stay calm, but also, I needed to drink. So I poured 3 glasses, one for each of us. I needed to play this out like I had all the time in the world, like none of this was bothering me. When I walked back into the living room, both of them looked up at me. Lydia was practically glowing, her face flushed with that too bright excitement that told me she'd already forgotten she was married. And Julian? Well, Julian was just there, smirking, like he'd already won. I handed out the whiskey, keeping my smile in place as I took a seat. They both seemed surprised that I wasn't making a scene, that I wasn't demanding answers or throwing accusations. I wasn't going to let them see my anger, at least not yet. "So, Julian," I said, trying to sound casual, like we were old pals. "I've been hearing a lot about you lately. Lydia's mentioned you a few times." Lydia's eyes flicked toward me for a second, a hint of nervousness behind her smile. I saw it, but she quickly covered it up. She was too busy laughing at something Julian said to notice how much she'd given away in that glance. Julian, meanwhile, puffed out his chest, clearly enjoying the attention. "Oh yeah, we've been working together for a while now. Lydia's been, really into my fitness programs." I could hear the arrogance in his voice, and it made my skin crawl even more. "I see," I said, leaning back in my chair. I didn't need to say more. I already knew enough. I already had all the information I needed to burn their lives to the ground. I took my phone out of my pocket and tapped the screen, bringing up a video. Slowly, I turned it toward them. Lydia's eyes widened in shock as the footage began to play. There, in crisp, clear detail, was her and Julian, in my bed. Laughing, kissing, mocking me. The video was so clean, so undeniable, that it felt like time stopped. Her face was frozen in horror as she realized what I'd seen. Julian's cocky grin faded, and for the first time since he'd walked in, he looked vulnerable. "You didn't think I'd just roll over, did you?" I asked, my voice ice cold, the words coming out slow and steady. Lydia scrambled for words, but she was already too late. Her facade was gone. Everett, please, please. No, I cut her off, my heart pounding, but my mind clearer than it had ever been. "You don't get to apologize now. You don't get to beg. You've ruined everything. You ruined us. Julian stood up, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. What the hell is this, man? He barked, his bravado returning as he tried to play it cool. You're gonna show me this and expect. Shut up, I snapped, standing up slowly. My eyes never left Lydia, who was now visibly shaking, tears streaming down her face. I couldn't look at her like I used to. Not anymore. You wanted to bring him into my house. Into our life. Well, now you're going to see the consequences. Lydia dropped her head into her hands, her sobs growing louder. But I wasn't going to let her make this about her. This was about them. About what they did. About the price they were going to pay. I turned to Julian. You think you can just walk in here and take whatever you want from me? Let me show you how much that costs. I wasn't done yet. Far from it. I could see the tension in the air, the way Lydia was falling apart, the way Julian tried to hold on to his arrogance like it was the only thing keeping him from collapsing. But there was no escaping the mess they'd made. This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for, even if I didn't realize it until now. Lydia was still on the floor, sobbing, her shoulders shaking as if she was going to break. But I wasn't about to let her guilt trip me. Not now. Not after everything. You threw it all away for this? I asked her, my voice low and steady. I wasn't shouting. I didn't need to. My words were sharp enough to cut through the sobs. For him? For some guy who's probably using you to make himself feel good. Lydia tried to look up at me, her mascara streaking down her cheeks. Everett, I made a mistake. It didn't mean anything. I swear. It didn't mean anything? I repeated, letting the disbelief hit me hard. You invited him into our home, into our bed. And you think I'm just supposed to accept that? After 21 years of loyalty. Her lips trembled, and I could see the panic in her eyes, but I wasn't done with her yet. You don't get to make excuses now, I said. You don't get to apologize. You don't get to fix this. This is who you really are. You just didn't think I'd find out. She collapsed onto the floor, her voice barely a whisper. Please, don't do this. I love you. I never meant to hurt you. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I turned to Julian. He was standing by the door now, looking more nervous than I'd ever seen him, his usual swagger nowhere to be found. I could see his hand twitching at his side like he was ready to bolt, but I wasn't going to let him off that easy. Julian, I said, keeping my voice cool. You think you can waltz in here and steal what's mine without consequences? You've got another thing coming. Julian shifted, his shoulders tense. Man, this isn't what you think. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I laughed. It wasn't a genuine laugh, but more of a dark, cynical chuckle. Oh, I think I know exactly what happened. You saw an opportunity, and you took it. Simple as that. You thought you could slip into my life and take my wife like I wouldn't notice. Like I wouldn't find out what you were doing behind my back. He tried to walk toward the door, but I wasn't done with him. You know, Julian, I said, keeping my voice even, I was going to let you walk out of here without facing any consequences. But now, I gave him a cold smile. Now I'm going to make sure you feel every inch of your failure. Julian stopped in his tracks, his face turning pale. What the hell are you talking about, man? I haven't done anything to you. I pulled out a folder from behind me, the edges worn but the contents sharp. I slid it onto the table in front of him, letting him see the papers inside. This is what I've been working on, Julian. Everything you've built up. Your precious Jim? Gone. Your reputation? Ruined. I've already sent emails to the board. You're done. They're firing you tonight. His face twisted with disbelief. You can't do that. I built that business. You don't have the right to. Right? I cut him off, my voice like ice. You think you built that business? You didn't do a damn thing. You used people, used your charm to take what you wanted, and now you're going to lose it all. Every single thing you worked for. I pulled out my phone and played a voicemail, the voice of the board's president confirming his termination. I didn't let it go on for too long, but long enough to let the weight of the words sink in. Done, I said, throwing my phone down onto the table. Julian took a step back, his face going pale. You can't be serious, man. You can't do this. I leaned in, my voice dropping low and dangerous. You're finished. No gym, no clients, no career. You'll be lucky if you can get a job flipping burgers, Julian. He was fuming now, his face red, his fists clenched. But he didn't make a move. He was a coward at heart. Just another guy who thought he could get away with hurting someone else without facing the fallout. You really think you can just come into my life and take everything from me? You think I wouldn't fight back? I asked, my voice a whisper now. Leave. Or I swear to God, you'll regret it. I don't care if you're bigger than me. You'll leave this house in pieces if you don't walk out of here on your own. I could see it in his eyes. He was done. All the bravado was gone. He turned on his heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I could hear the crunch of gravel under his feet as he sped off into the night, the echo of his car engine fading into the distance. But Lydia, she was still there, a broken mess on the floor. Everett, please, she cried, trying to crawl toward me, but I didn't move. I was beyond the point of caring about her tears. No, Lydia. You threw away everything we had for nothing. You think you can come back from this? You can't. There's no going back now. She reached out for my hand, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, Everett. Please. Just give me one more chance. We can fix this. I stared at her for a moment, the weight of what she had done settling in. There was no fixing this. Not now. Not after everything she'd done. No. Lydia. You destroyed us. And now, you're going to live with the consequences. I'm done. And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving her to face the mess she had made. The next few minutes felt like a lifetime, but I didn't look back. I didn't need to see Lydia on the floor, crying, begging. She had used up all her chances, and I wasn't about to give her a free pass just because she was suddenly sorry. I went into the kitchen, pouring myself another drink. The whiskey burned, but it was a welcome numbness. I needed it to dull the anger, to keep my head clear. But more than that, I needed it to keep me from breaking, from letting all the hurt and betrayal pour out of me. I could hear Lydia sobbing in the next room, but I didn't go to her. I had nothing left to say. She'd taken everything from me. My trust, my love, my years of loyalty. There was no fixing that, no working through it. This wasn't something we could just sweep under the rug and pretend it hadn't happened. The sound of her crying stopped after a while, and that's when I knew it was time. Time for the last move. I pulled out my phone again, this time scrolling through my contacts until I found the number I needed. I called my lawyer first. He answered after a couple of rings. Everett, he said, his voice still groggy. What's up? I need you to start the divorce papers. Now. Don't waste any time. There was a brief silence on the other end before he spoke again. Are you sure? I could hear the hesitation in his voice. It was the kind of hesitation you hear when someone thinks you might be overreacting, when they don't fully understand the depths of what's going on. But I wasn't backing down. This was happening. I'm sure. I've made my decision, I said, my voice hard, unyielding. I want everything. The house. The accounts. All of it. And make sure this goes down quickly. I'm not dragging this out. Got it. I'll start the process. I'll be in touch. I hung up without saying goodbye. I didn't need to. It was done. Next, I dialed the number for my private investigator. I'd had him on retainer for months now, even before I knew for sure what Lydia was up to. He'd been following her, gathering evidence for me. I'd suspected something for a while, and when I found out about Julian, I knew I needed to make sure I had every angle covered. The phone rang once, then twice, before he picked up. Everett, he said, his voice low and professional. Everything's set. What do you need? I need you to send everything to Lydia's employer, immediately. All the footage, the photos, the proof. Her career is over tonight. There was no hesitation from his end. Consider it done. I'll send it all out now. I'll keep you updated. I didn't even thank him. I didn't need to. This was part of the plan. I leaned back in the chair, feeling the weight of it all sink in. The anger, the betrayal, the cold satisfaction of knowing I was in control now. Lydia had spent years making me feel small, invisible, unimportant. But now I was the one holding the power. And I was going to make sure she felt every ounce of it. After a while, the house was silent. The echoes of Lydia's sobbing had long since faded, and I could hear the distant hum of her retreating footsteps upstairs. She wasn't trying to fix anything anymore. She was packing her things. But I wasn't done with her yet. I grabbed my jacket and walked to the front door. I'd already called a security team earlier in the day. I wasn't about to let Lydia just walk out of here with a suitcase and a smile, like everything was going to be okay. No. She needed to be escorted. She needed to understand the gravity of her choices. I called the security guard who'd been stationed outside. "It's time," I said simply. "Escort her out. Make sure she leaves with nothing but the clothes on her back." "Understood," the voice on the other end replied. A few minutes later, I heard the sound of a car pulling up outside. It wasn't even dark yet, but it felt like everything was about to shift into a new, permanent night. Lydia's world was crumbling, and she had no idea what was coming next. When I walked upstairs, I found her standing in the bedroom, her clothes scattered around, her face pale and defeated. She looked like someone who had just realized she wasn't going to get away with this, like the weight of everything was finally sinking in. "Everett," she whispered, as if speaking my name would somehow fix everything. Please don't do this. I was stupid, okay? I made a mistake, but I love you. I love us." I just shook my head. "You don't love me. You never did. You loved the idea of me, the life I gave you. But now, you're going to lose it all. You're losing everything." She looked up at me, the fear in her eyes almost palpable. "Please, don't. I can't lose everything." "You already have," I said. "You lost it the moment you brought him into our home. The moment you betrayed me." There was no more fight in her. She collapsed onto the bed, her hands covering her face as she cried once more, her sobs muffled by the sheets. But there was no sympathy left in me. "Time to go, Lydia," I said, my voice firm, no room for negotiation. Moments later, 2 security guards came in, their presence commanding. They didn't say a word. They didn't need to. They just stood there, waiting for her to gather what little she had left. I didn't stick around to watch her leave. I didn't need to. This was the end. And as I stood in that quiet room, the house still for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt free, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. But this was just the beginning of a new chapter. And I wasn't going to let anyone stand in my way. Not Lydia. Not Julian. Not anyone. The house felt empty after she left. Not in the way you might think, like a void or a sadness, but more like it was breathing again. The heavy weight that had been hanging in the air for months, maybe even longer, finally lifted. And I couldn't believe how quickly it all unraveled. One minute, I'm trying to salvage something that was already broken, and the next minute, bam, it's over. No more pretending. No more lies. I took a moment to sit down, to just breathe. The kind of deep, steadying breath that I hadn't been able to take in a long time. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't angry. I wasn't consumed by the rage that had been building up inside me for months. All that tension, all that pain, it was gone. And in its place, relief. Pure, unfiltered relief. I knew what I had to do next. The divorce papers would come through, the finances would be sorted out, and Lydia would be left to deal with the wreckage of her own making. But that was just paperwork. The emotional cleanup? That was where the real work started. The hardest part of this whole thing wasn't the betrayal. It wasn't even the humiliation of finding out she had slept with someone else in our own home. No. The hardest part was knowing how much I had let myself believe in her. How much I had sacrificed, convinced myself we were building something that couldn't be torn apart. And then, in one single stupid act, she destroyed it all. I picked up my phone, my finger hovering over her contact name. I knew she'd be calling soon, begging me to reconsider, telling me that I misunderstood, that things weren't what they seemed. The thing is, I knew it wasn't a mistake. I knew exactly what she'd done. The video, the emails, everything, it all proved it. And no matter how much she begged, no matter how much she cried, there was no fixing this. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Instead, I texted my lawyer, telling him to proceed with everything. The sooner this was all behind me, the better. I didn't care about the money or the assets. Everything I had was tainted now, connected to a life that no longer existed. What mattered was the peace that was slowly starting to settle in my chest. I was moving on, and I was going to make sure I did it the right way. It wasn't long before I heard from my private investigator again. The man had been on top of everything, getting results faster than I could have hoped for. "I've sent everything," he confirmed. "Her employer's already been notified. She's going to have to answer for what she did. This is going to hit her hard." It hit me too. Watching someone unravel so quickly, it wasn't satisfying, at least not in the way I thought it would be. It didn't give me some sense of victory or justice. I didn't feel any higher than them, standing on some moral pedestal. It just felt necessary. Like something that had to happen for me to get out of this nightmare alive. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. My mind kept racing, replaying every moment of the day. The confrontation, the way Lydia had looked when she realized everything was over, the way Julian had tried to talk his way out of it like some sleazy salesman. I realized, at some point in the night, that this wasn't just about Lydia or Julian. This was about me, about my own strength. For the longest time, I had let them control the narrative, let them define my life. But now I was the one writing the story. I was the one who was going to come out of this on top. I grabbed my coat, threw it on, and headed out. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I needed to be somewhere else. I needed to do something, to break away from the life I'd spent so many years building with someone who never valued it. I drove for hours, just letting the road take me. The wind whipped through the windows, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could actually breathe again. It wasn't until I stopped at a small diner at the edge of town that I let myself relax a little. The kind of place where the coffee's strong and the waitress calls you Han, even if she's never seen you before. I sat down at the counter, ordered a cup of coffee, and just took it all in. That's when she walked in. I didn't expect it. I didn't even recognize her at first, but the moment our eyes met, I felt it. The connection. Not like the one I'd had with Lydia. This was different. This was light. It wasn't heavy. She smiled, a soft, genuine smile, and I smiled back without thinking. "Is this seat taken?" she asked, her voice warm and kind. "No," I said, gesturing to the empty stool beside me. "It's all yours." Her name was Elena. She was warm, funny, and easy to talk to in a way that made the world feel a little smaller. A little simpler. She didn't ask about my past, didn't probe about the wreckage I'd just escaped. She just let me be me. And for the first time in so long, I wasn't weighed down by the ghost of someone else's mistakes. We talked for hours. The conversation just flowed, like we'd known each other for years, not minutes. I didn't tell her everything, but I didn't need to. What mattered was that I felt seen again. Not as someone's husband, not as someone's victim. Just me. When I left that diner, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Real hope. Not the kind that depends on promises or second chances, but the kind that comes from knowing you can walk away from the past and create something new. For the first time in months, I felt like I was finally moving forward. Not running from the past, but embracing the future. And for the first time in years I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was going to be okay. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, calls, and waiting. I kept myself busy, burying my mind in anything that would keep me distracted from what had just happened. The divorce papers were on their way. The assets were being divided. I wasn't even sure what to feel about it anymore. There was no excitement in it. No joy. Just necessity. The life I'd known was gone, and all that was left was the cleanup. But something started to shift as the days went by. Every time I picked up the phone to check in with my lawyer or my private investigator, something inside me started to stir. The weight of everything, the betrayal, the years I'd spent with Lydia, all of it started to fade into the background. It was like I was slowly waking up from a fog I hadn't even realized I was in. I'd been so consumed by anger and hurt for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to be me again. To just exist without the cloud of someone else's lies hanging over me. I'd been walking around in a haze for months, trying to hold everything together while Lydia tore it apart behind my back. But now it was different. I could breathe again. I didn't feel like I was drowning anymore. The real surprise, though, came when I got the call from my financial advisor. "We've liquidated everything," he said. "It's all set. You're in a good position, Everett. You can start fresh." I didn't really know how to feel about it. The house, the bank accounts, everything that used to be ours was now mine. And while part of me was relieved, another part felt empty, like there was no real victory in it. I was sitting at my kitchen table when I heard from Lydia again. This time, it was a text. Short. Simple. "Everett. Please. I need to talk. I'm sorry. I was wrong. Please." I stared at the screen for a long time, my thumb hovering over the reply button. For a second, I almost felt guilty. Almost. But then I remembered what she had done. What they had done. And just like that, the guilt vanished. I deleted the message without responding. She had her chance, and she had thrown it all away. But still, there was a nagging thought in the back of my mind. The whole thing had been so quick, so clinical. One day, everything's fine. The next, I'm signing divorce papers and watching my wife get escorted out of the house like a criminal. I hadn't even given myself the time to process it all. Maybe that was my way of dealing with it. Maybe I was just trying to move on so quickly because I didn't want to deal with the fact that everything I'd known, everything I'd built, was gone. I started thinking about Elena more. The diner was a turning point. I knew that. I hadn't expected it, but her presence felt like a breath of fresh air. She didn't need me to be perfect, didn't expect me to have everything figured out. She didn't even know the full story. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that she made me feel human again, like I wasn't defined by my mistakes or someone else's choices. I found myself checking my phone more often than I should, hoping for a text from her, hoping for a sign that she might be just as interested in me as I was in her. But I didn't want to rush anything, not after everything that had happened. So I took a step back. I let things unfold slowly, naturally. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't keep running from my past. I wasn't going to let Lydia's betrayal dictate how I moved forward. I couldn't let her or Julian or anyone else have that kind of power over me. Not anymore. And so, I made a decision. I was going to stop looking back. I was going to start over, truly start over. No more living in the shadow of my old life. No more clinging to memories of a marriage that was never what I thought it was. I drove by the house a few days after Lydia left, just to check on things. The lawn was still well kept, the windows clean, but the place didn't feel like home anymore. It felt hollow. I stood in front of the house for a while, staring at the door, the windows, the life I used to share with her. I thought about going inside, about retrieving a few things, maybe some pictures, some mementos. But as I stood there, I realized something. I didn't need any of it. I didn't need the reminders of a past that no longer existed. Instead, I drove away, my hands on the wheel, my eyes focused on the road ahead. When I called Elena later that day, I felt a little lighter. "Hey, Elena," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "How about we grab that coffee again soon? I'd like to see you." There was a slight pause on the other end, and then her soft laugh. "I'd like that," she said. "When?" "Whenever works for you," I replied, smiling to myself. "I'm free tomorrow." "Tomorrow it is, then," she agreed, and just like that, my world felt a little more hopeful. As I hung up, I realized something I hadn't even thought about in months. I was moving forward. I wasn't waiting for anyone to fix me. I wasn't waiting for Lydia's apology or Julian's downfall to feel better. I wasn't defined by what had happened to me. I was creating my own path now. And for the first time in a long time, I actually looked forward to what was coming next. The coffee shop was a cozy little place on the corner of a quiet street. The kind of spot where the barista remembers your name, where the chairs are mismatched but comfortable, and where you can't help but feel at home. I arrived a few minutes early, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted to be sure I wasn't rushing into this. It wasn't that I was afraid of Elena. It was more that I didn't want to rush into anything without fully knowing what it was I was looking for. After everything with Lydia, I had to make sure I was ready for this. Ready to feel something real again. I didn't need to wait long before I saw her. She walked through the door, her eyes scanning the room before landing on me. She smiled. That smile again. The one that had made me feel like the weight of the world wasn't quite so heavy. "Hey," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. "How's it going?" It was an easy conversation at first. The usual small talk. "How's work? How's your day been?" But the moment I looked at her, really looked at her, something clicked. She wasn't just a distraction from my past. She wasn't some rebound. She was different. She had this way of being present, of making you feel like you were the only person in the room, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about Lydia or Julian or any of the bullshit that had piled up over the years. I was just there, and it felt good. "I'm doing okay," I said, stirring my coffee, my mind still a little hazy from everything that had happened. "I'm getting there, you know? Taking it one step at a time." She smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile that felt like pity. It felt like understanding. "You don't have to rush anything, Everett. I'm not going anywhere." It wasn't the words that hit me the hardest. It was the way she said it. Like she actually cared. Like she understood that things had been hard for me, and that I didn't have to have it all figured out right away. "Thanks," I said, meeting her eyes. "I appreciate that." We spent the next couple of hours talking. It wasn't anything earth-shattering, but for the first time in a long time, it felt real. She wasn't asking me about Lydia, or my marriage, or anything that had gone wrong in my life. She wasn't trying to fix me. She was just there. And it felt good to talk to someone who didn't have any expectations, someone who just wanted to enjoy the moment with me. As we said our goodbyes, she gave me a quick hug, her arms warm and sincere. "I'm looking forward to seeing you again, Everett," she said with a smile that made my heart beat a little faster. "Me too," I replied, feeling a small spark of hope flicker inside me. As I walked to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. For the first time in what felt like ages, I was actually looking forward to the future. It was strange, but in a way that felt right. I wasn't rushing things with Elena. I wasn't trying to force anything. But the way she made me feel, like I wasn't broken, like I was worth something again, was a feeling I hadn't experienced in a long time. The next few weeks were a blur of slow, steady progress. I kept seeing Elena. We had dinner once, then twice. We'd take long walks on weekends, and sometimes we'd sit in the same coffee shop where we'd first met, just talking about life. She wasn't asking for anything from me. There were no demands. She was just there. A steady presence that reminded me what it felt like to be me again. But there was one night, a few weeks in, when I realized how far I'd come. I was sitting in my living room, staring out the window, when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Lydia. I had been expecting it, in a way. But when I opened the text, I felt nothing. Not a flicker of anger or bitterness. Just indifference. "Everett, I've been thinking about everything. I know I messed up, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I miss you. I miss us. I just want a chance to talk. Please." I stared at the words for a while, trying to process them. But the truth was, I didn't need to respond. I didn't need her apology. I didn't need her closure. So, I deleted the message. Just like that. No regrets. No second thoughts. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was just done. I realized then that this was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment when I could fully close that chapter of my life. The chapter with Lydia. The one that had been full of lies, betrayal, and hurt. I wasn't holding on to any of it anymore. I wasn't letting it weigh me down. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The next time I saw Elena, I didn't think about Lydia. I didn't think about the past at all. I just thought about her, about the connection we had, and how easy it felt to be with her. I didn't know what would happen, But for the first time since all of this began, I didn't need to know. I didn't need to plan my future. I was just living it. And that was enough for me. There were still moments when I felt the sting of everything that had happened. The flashbacks to Lydia's betrayal, the nights I spent alone, the gut-wrenching realization that I had been fooled for so long. But those moments didn't control me anymore. They didn't define who I was. I was moving forward, and that felt like enough. I wasn't looking for revenge anymore. I didn't need to make anyone feel what I'd felt. I just needed to live, to reclaim my own happiness, my own sense of self. And as I looked over at Elena one evening, her smile lighting up the room, I realized something. Maybe this was the real reward. Maybe peace wasn't about what you destroyed, it was about what you build after the storm. And I was building something new. Something good. The months that followed felt like a new chapter, a clean break from everything that had come before. I found myself getting used to the quiet in my house, the space that had once felt suffocating now giving me room to breathe. It was no longer a place haunted by memories of betrayal and broken promises. It was mine now. It was a space I could fill with whatever I chose, and I was finally ready to start doing just that. Elena and I were taking things slow, which felt right. We weren't rushing into anything, but with every day that passed, I could feel myself letting go of the past more and more. I wasn't the man I used to be. The angry, broken version of myself that had been stuck in the middle of something he couldn't fix. I wasn't carrying the weight of Lydia's lies anymore. I wasn't letting her decisions shape my future. One evening, as Elena and I sat on the couch, watching an old movie that neither of us really cared about, I realized something. She had become more than just a distraction. More than just someone to pass the time with. She was real. She was someone who didn't need me to be anything other than myself. She didn't want me to be perfect or fixed. She just accepted me as I was. And that was something I hadn't realized I needed until I had it. It wasn't just the way she listened to me, or how we could spend hours talking about everything and nothing at all. It was the way she made me feel like I wasn't some victim of my past, like I wasn't defined by the pain I'd been through. With her, I didn't feel like I had to explain myself. She saw me for who I was now, not who I had been. "Everett," she said one night, after we'd spent a long evening talking about everything from childhood memories to our favorite books, "I know you've been through a lot. I know things haven't been easy. But I want you to know something." She paused, looking at me with a softness in her eyes that I couldn't quite explain. "I'm not going anywhere. Whatever happens, I'm here. I'm not looking for a perfect story. I'm looking for a real one." And for the first time in a long time, I felt like someone finally got it. Finally understood that I didn't need saving. I just needed to be seen. And Elena, in all her kindness, in all her patience, had done exactly that. We didn't talk about the past much. She didn't ask about Lydia. She didn't ask me to relive the hell I'd been through. And I didn't want to go digging for the pain anymore. There was no reason to. I didn't need to carry that burden. I was free. And with her, I was learning how to truly live again. One night, after we had dinner together at a small Italian place downtown, we were walking back to her car when I realized that this was the kind of life I'd been waiting for. Not the one I thought I wanted when I was with Lydia, but the kind of life that made me feel whole again. "I'm glad we met," I said, breaking the comfortable silence between us. She smiled, tilting her head slightly. "Me too," she said, her voice light, but with an honesty I could feel. "You're a good man, Everett. You deserve the best." I smiled back, the words warm and true, and for the first time in years, I actually believed them. I wasn't just trying to convince myself I was okay. I was okay. I was better. The divorce had gone through without much fanfare. Lydia had tried to contact me a couple more times, but each time, I let it go. I didn't need closure from her. I didn't need her approval. I was finally at peace with what happened. The best thing I could do now was move on and build something better, something real. One evening, as I stood on the balcony of my apartment, looking out at the city skyline, I thought back to everything that had brought me here. The pain, the anger, the betrayal. It all seemed so distant now, like it happened to someone else. Like it was a chapter in a book I'd already closed. I had come so far, and I wasn't looking back anymore. My phone buzzed, and I glanced down at it. It was a text from Elena. How about we go on that weekend getaway we've been talking about? I think it's time for us to make some new memories. I smiled. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to take a leap. I wasn't afraid to trust again. I replied, "Sounds perfect. Let's make it happen." And just like that, I knew I was ready. Ready for whatever came next. Ready for a future that wasn't shaped by anyone else's mistakes. Ready for a new beginning. As the sun set behind the buildings, casting a warm glow across the city, I took a deep breath and let it all sink in. I was free. And nothing was going to hold me back. The past was behind me. The future was mine to create. And for the first time in a long time, I was finally ready to live.